Good morning. Welcome. It's Wendy Johnstone here again, and thank you for being here this morning. It's Family Caregiver Month. It's May, and it's always an exciting time for us because we get to showcase our support programs and education and passion for family caregivers. We do that every day, but May is special because it's Family Caregiver Month. We also just want to always thank our caregivers for sharing their stories and experiences with us. The last couple of weeks have been quite a journey for I think for all of us, and we just want to again show our gratitude and thank you for caregivers that continue to call the support line and reach out to us. Before we begin today's topic, we just like to review the platform Facebook so everyone's well aware of how to reach us and how the platform can be used. So first off, I think last week we had talked about this wonderful funding we had received. We received an extra a grant from BC Ministry of Health to support family caregivers Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. If you're an active user on Facebook, you can send us your questions, your ideas, and concerns, and we'll do our best to answer them through the inbox. We also just like to let people be aware that the experiences and the information expressed are meant to speak to caregivers on a very general level, and they may not reflect your own personal values or experiences. And also that the Facebook platform is public, and so we can't really control privacy and confidentiality. We also just want to make sure that you check our website regularly, you sign up for our newsletter and social media feeds, as we really try to provide regular updates on the recommendations from public health around COVID and some of the new supportive resources that are being distributed and being discussed. So today we are talking about self-identifying as a caregiver and why it's important. So how do you know if you're a caregiver or if someone you know is a caregiver? Well, guess what? There is a high probability that you don't always identify as a caregiver, or the person you're concerned about doesn't realize they're one. And the reason behind this is because caregivers usually relate to the person they're caring for through, their primary relationship. So if they're a parent to an adult child, if they're a spouse, if they're caring for an aging parent, they don't necessarily see their caregiving as a specific role. And caregiving, it doesn't happen in isolation, pardon the pun, from other roles such as a career, being a volunteer, being a partner, being a friend. I mean, this often explains why many family caregivers don't recognize their role right away, which is also compounded by our current medical and social system, which focuses more on the patients. Now, we're seeing a shift to include family caregivers. We still have a long way to go. But it also really makes it important for family caregivers to continue speaking out about their role. And quite frankly, not everyone likes to be called a caregiver or calls himself a caregiver. And so I think it's also really important that we look at ways to reframe the language and to take a look at what caregiving means. So caregivers are essentially people who have social and personal and intimate relationships, so friends and families or partners, with individuals who have some type of disabling physical health conditions. They're either frail due to aging or disability, they have a mental health challenge, or all of these. Sometimes we have people who are caring for more than one person. So people who provide care, they may use different labels. So they might use caregiver, they might use care partner, they might use care provider, or they may prefer not to label their care work at all. And so sometimes we have found it's helpful to ask, are you looking after someone who couldn't manage without your help? To remove that label or to simply reframe it in a way that makes it less clinical or less formal. So no matter what they or what we call caregivers, because we have to apply the word caregiver in this conversation, caregivers take on a role that's separate and distinct from their primary relationship with the person whom they're caring for. And it's really important to make that distinction, and this is why it's actually important to talk about it in this idea of self-identification, because the role of the caregiver is emotionally, psychologically, and physically taxing. And so if someone doesn't recognize they're caring, then they're likely going to miss out on A, understanding why they're feeling the way they're feeling, and B, what supports are actually available to help them at whatever stage they are through the caregiving, what we call the caregiving trajectory. And if they don't tap into both of those areas and they're caregiving over an extended period of time, or even a short, intense time, it can lead to burnout and their ability to continue caregiving. So there's been a lot of more recent research and discussion around self-identification as caregiving. And the Change Foundation, which is based out of Ontario, found in their research that only 42% of all caregivers self-identified. And then 35% didn't understand they were caregivers until their role was explained to them. And then almost a quarter of them, even after the role was defined, they still didn't see themselves as caregivers. And so we won't go into all the complexities because obviously, there's other things that apply to self-identification or how people see themselves. But we can see that less than half of all caregivers actually self-identify. And as it turns out, whether it's a healthcare professional or sometimes it's a friend or someone who's not emotionally invested, are often the individuals that often can help provide support or prompt that person to seek more support and say, gosh, it seems like you're doing a lot of caring for, so-and-so, and how are you doing? We also as human beings have this amazing ability to adapt to our new normal. And so often what we find is caregivers take on their role, they start down the process, and it just becomes their new normal. And so they don't necessarily think that there can be something different. And so having support from healthcare professionals, from family friends to help maybe talk about what's going on or help give a different perspective can also help in self-identification. So why is it important? Well, we've talked about two things already, but I think the other important thing too that we're finding, the more that we're delving into the evidence side or what people are speaking to us about when we hear about the personal stories, is that we know that caregivers have a great satisfaction with the care and support they provide to others. That's really well documented. The other piece that's really well documented is this struggle to maintain their own well-being in the process. So while there's lots of positives, and there can be lots of positives, family caregivers, they experience stress and negative health outcomes as a result of having to care on a regular basis. So what the research also shows us is that family caregivers are at a higher risk of suffering from chronic illness, isolation, and depression. And so this is where this whole terminology of what we hear and what we certainly speak to is this idea of, caregivers have to put on their own oxygen mask first. That's where it comes from, because their own health is at a higher risk from being a caregiver. And we also know that, when we're not at our best or we're not looking after ourselves, we generally don't operate in the world at our best. And so that applies to caregiving as well. One of the key messages we've also heard through research conducted by the Seniors Advocate of BC and the caregivers who call us is that caregivers who identify themselves as caregivers or as a carer or as someone who's helping someone, they are more likely, and they reach out for support and they get some form of support that speaks to them, they are more likely to sustain their caregiver role over an extended period of time. And I think that's really important. And the other thing I want to quickly speak to is this idea that it's not one size fits all. And so it's really important that we understand that there's lots of ways that caregivers can be supported. And in fact, what they call this multi-intervention. So people having access to a wide variety of different programs or services or information from different organizations is going to allow this opportunity for caregivers to be able to tap into what they need at the right time. And so that's often why when family caregivers call us, we do our best to not only connect them to our services, but to connect them to other services, whether it's disease specific, whether it's maybe other organizations that have more experience in one particular area around how they're feeling. It's often why we refer into counseling if that's an option and available. And so we understand that this whole circle of support is really, really critical. One of the things that I think is important for us to talk about it today too is this idea, and we hear this, when we've got a caregiver on the phone, or they're in our support line, or we're doing a coaching call, we'll say, we might end up talking about the care recipient, and then we'll say, well, how are you doing? Sometimes that's met with silence, because it's like, oh wow, the attention's shifted on me now. And then sometimes the response we get is, I'm fine. No, really, I'm fine. But when we start, asking that question again, or allowing that caregiver more time to reflect, often what we find is that because the conversation is typically more on the care recipient and not on the family caregivers, they often neglect to care for themselves. And so family caregivers who are supported earlier in their journey have, again, a greater chance of sustaining their own role. They also have a greater chance of overall well-being in all domains. So emotionally, physically, spiritually, physically, and mentally. There is a really great resource on our website, and it's how to build your personal resilience. And it talks about these 5 domains, which are all critical, actually to all of us as humans, but with caregiving as well. And so I certainly recommend that if you're interested in understanding how to stay resilient or looking at self-care, it's also a great resource online. So as we're finishing up here, if you know a caregiver, or if you're a caregiver and you're contemplating reaching out for support, anytime is a good time to offer information and support. What we find is that caregivers get different things out of information and support at different times along their journey as a caregiver. So sometimes new caregivers come in to the organization, and they call us, and really they're trying to get an uptake of information. They're trying to understand, oh my goodness, the diagnosis. They're trying to just figure out logistics. And then, as caregivers continue to care, what tends to happen is, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. What tends to happen is they end up needing different types of supports at a different time. So that's the idea, that there is always some type of support available depending on the actual journey of the person. What we also find is that caregivers who either have multiple responsibilities, or they've got complex situations, or they're dealing with individuals who have mental health or substance abuse conditions, the frail and elderly. I've done a very poor job of that. That they're diagnosed with, a life-limiting condition, or they're being discharged from the hospital, that they often need a wide variety of support over a longer period of time. So, where do we find more support and resources? I'm so sorry about that telephone. I thought I had turned off all of my devices this morning. Well, first of all, call our support line. All the information is on our Facebook site on how to reach us. We're available Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 7 p.m. We can support you based on your unique needs. And I think that's one thing that sets Family Caregivers of BC apart from other organizations, is that we look simply at family caregiving. We're 100% dedicated to family caregivers. We can certainly help bring more awareness into your situation. We can listen to you. We can suggest ideas and resources. And we can also refer you into more supports and services within our organization. Tune into our podcasts. You can find a whole whack of resources on our website. And I know we're going to have a couple of links to some of those key resources below in the comment boxes below. we've been working really hard at taking the information we've been presenting and putting it into bite-sized pieces on our website and in our particular resources. So we're super excited about that. And I guess I'll just finish up by saying, as we like to try and finish up these Facebooks, I hope you'll join me in asking yourself, what's one thing, big or small, that you think you can do today or tomorrow to put your own well-being first? Mine's definitely going to check my devices, make sure they're on mute before we go Facebook Live. And if you're concerned about someone else in a caring role, or you're even concerned about yourself, how might you find a way to reach out to an organization, to a person, to Family Caregivers of BC to help support yourself or to encourage someone else to reach out for support. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye for now.